Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the Archivist of the United States, David Ferrier.
Good evening, and welcome to the 2015 National Archives Foundation Gala and Records of Achievement Awards ceremony. And a special welcome to our friends from the Hill, Senator Lamar Alexander, and more importantly, his wife, Honey, who is on the board of the foundation. And of course, everyone knows they're from Tennessee. And Senator David Perdue and his wife, Bonnie, from Georgia. Welcome. And of course, our special guest, former Attorney General Eric Holder. Welcome. For those of us who spend every waking moment worrying about the records of the country, this is the evening we look forward to every year. The opportunity to celebrate the accomplishments of an individual who has taken advantage of our hard work. Taylor Branch's Pulitzer Prize-winning narrative of the civil rights movement, which has helped shape our understanding of that turbulent time in our history, conducted extensive research at several National Archives facilities, including the Eisenhower, Kennedy, and Johnson Presidential Libraries, where he mined the notes of meetings, reviewed oral histories, and listened to countless hours of presidential recordings, all carefully collected, preserved, and made available by generations of National Archives staff. And speaking of the staff, this is also an opportunity to publicly acknowledge their many contributions in serving the American people, whether a veteran trying to negotiate his or her benefits, a genealogist discovering their roots, the high school student studying the life of Harriet Tubman, and on and on. Many of the staff are with us tonight and will be strategically placed at your dinner tables, and I hope you get to learn more from them about their passion for their work. But for now, I ask them to stand up and be recognized, the members of the staff. The National Archives holds many records pertaining to civil rights, including the March on Washington photographs, the Civil Rights Act of 1964, and the Voting Rights Act of 1965. We even have Taylor's own Freedom of Information lawsuit against the FBI. Taylor Branch's work demonstrates the power of the stories preserved in the National Archives. We house the tangible reminders of where we have been, how far we have come, and see every day how these reminders inspire others to discover other important stories to share with the world. Tonight, we also celebrate the incredible public-private partnership between the National Archives and the National Archives Foundation. And this year, we have a lot to celebrate. We launched the current exhibit in the Lawrence F. O'Brien Gallery, Spirited Republic, Alcohol in American History. We continue to have a tremendous response to the David M. Rubenstein Gallery and its permanent exhibition, Records of Rights, featuring the Magna Carta. We welcomed an extraordinary group of women last spring for our annual McGowan Forum on Women in Leadership, and we introduced a whole new audience to the archives by hosting our first after-hours party with alcohol. 2016's lineup of programs and exhibits is an exciting one, including the opening of the next O'Brien Gallery exhibit, Amending America, which will feature original documents from the National Archives that highlight the remarkable American story of how we have amended or attempted to amend our Constitution in order to form a more perfect union, including more than 11,000 amendment suggestions. Thank you to the Foundation for this great partnership, and welcome to the members of our board who are in attendance tonight. Our partners at the Foundation share our passion for educating our citizens about the important work of the National Archives in preserving our history and making it accessible to the American people. Please join me in welcoming the chair and president of the Foundation's board, Alelia Bundles.
Thank you very much, David. And good evening to everybody. On behalf of the board of the National Archives Foundation, as well as our executive director, Patrick Madden, I welcome you to the 2015 Records of Achievement Awards ceremony. As the National Archives nonprofit partner, it is our privilege to promote awareness of the archives and the many treasures that tell the American story from the colonial era to the present. We generate both financial and creative support to help develop many of the exhibitions, public programs, and educational initiatives that make the millions, billions, David, right, of federal documents accessible to the American public and to people from around the world. We even hosted Prince Charles, along with David, a few months ago. May I ask our board members to stand? Thank you all from coming near and far, some of you who braved the storms and the airplanes today, so thank you for being here. Whether it is a New Year's Eve viewing of the Emancipation Proclamation on the 150th anniversary of the issuance of that pivotal document, or the annual 4th of July reading of the Declaration of Independence on the steps of the archives, we strive to make our nation's history compelling and relevant. Whether we are helping to host a sleepover for elementary school children in the rotunda with their sleeping bags, or sponsoring a panel of political cartoonists, which you can come back to see on November 19th, we want to make the American story compelling and fun when we can. All of those projects are possible because of our collaboration with David Ferriero, the 10th Archivist of the United States, and his staff. And tonight's festivities are possible because of our generous sponsors. We thank our board member, Jim Ciccone, and welcome his colleagues who have come to be our friends from AT&T. Thank you all. Who once again have lent their support for the gala. We are grateful to Maris Cuneo. Maris, raise your hand. And the Maris Cuneo Foundation for believing in what we do for the 6th year, and to Maris's husband, Peter Cuneo, one of our stalwart board members. And I'll just mention Patrick Butler, his brother-in-law who brought him onto the board, and Pat, we miss you. A big thank you to Governor Jim Blanchard and Janet Blanchard for returning again as sponsors. And Jim, my personal gratitude to you for all you do as vice chairman of the board. You always come through, so thank you very much. It's nice to have a former governor, ambassador, and congressman as your partner in fulfilling a mission. And many thanks as well to Marvin Weisberg, our treasurer, board treasurer, who always is thinking of ways to assist with his unfailing kindness and generosity. Marvin, thank you. We are grateful as well to our honorary host committee, whose bold-faced names lend glamour and gravitas to this evening. Tonight, we're especially pleased to present our highest honor to Taylor Branch in recognition of his groundbreaking work in the trilogy America in the King Years. An authority on America's civil rights movement, Taylor's narrative history of the United States during the civil rights era is a work that will still be must-reading a century from now. While he optimistically believed that he'd complete those thousands of pages in 3 years, the project consumed 24 years of his life, from 1982 through 2006. And many people know him for this work. That's what he's most well known for those big, thick books. But, you know, his breadth of work, his body of work is so amazing, from working with John Dean on his biography and the Watergate years, to interviewing President Clinton, and those tapes are somewhere that will eventually be released to the American public, to writing about the NCAA. I mean, the body of work is just amazing. So everyone will remember him a century from now because of the trilogy, but all of these other things are very important. The Records of Achievement Award, the Foundation's highest honor, is bestowed upon an individual who shares our passion for history and civics education, and Lord knows we need that right now, who cherishes national accuracy and who relies on original records, especially those held by the National Archives, to inform their work. Taylor Branch epitomizes the true spirit of the award through his devotion to telling the American story in the most interesting manner possible and to using the resources of the National Archives. As we celebrate the 50th anniversary of the Voting Rights Act, there is no more fitting recipient. Taylor, we are honored to have you with us here tonight. We also are very honored to welcome former Attorney General Eric Holder, who will lead the conversation with Taylor. Mr. Holder, and I'm going to say Mr. Holder, Eric, because I'm introducing you formally. Mr. Holder served as the 82nd Attorney General of the United States from February 2009 to April 2015. As the third longest serving Attorney General in U.S. history and the first African American to hold that office, Mr. Holder is an internationally recognized leader across a broad range of regulatory enforcement, criminal justice, and national security issues. In 2014, Time magazine named him to its list of 100 most influential people, noting that he had worked tirelessly to ensure equal justice. Including his tenure as Attorney General, Mr. Holder has served in government for more than 30 years, having been appointed to various positions requiring U.S. Senate confirmation by Presidents Obama, Clinton, and Reagan. And so I just will say Eric and I were trustees at Columbia University together, and Eric is getting a big honor from Columbia in another couple of weeks, so I'm going to get to celebrate him again in just a few days. Taylor, as you know, we've prepared a brief video about your work, but first we have a little surprise for you. Not many people know this, but Taylor is an accomplished singer and musician. With us tonight, he's holding his head. I love that. This is what we wanted. With us tonight is Soulful Review, a choir founded through the efforts of Taylor, Charles Reichelt, and Andrew Foster Connors, the senior pastor at Brown Memorial Park Avenue Presbyterian Church. Soulful Review is a multi-talented, all-male ensemble of doctors, lawyers, judges, clergy, professional musicians, and friends who sing gospel, spirituals, and contemporary genres, and who arrange all their selections. The group performs at worship services and community events throughout Baltimore. Taylor and his wife, Christy, who's here with us tonight, are both active members of the Brown Memorial Chancel Choir, and Taylor is the director of Soulful Review. The ensemble celebrated its 10th anniversary this September. We'll now be treated to Freedom Trilogy, arranged by Soulful Review with soloist Jim Cox. His mouth is hanging open. That is the best.
singing. There'll be singing. There'll be singing over me. And before I'd be a slave, I'd be buried in my grave and go home to my Lord and be free. Come and go with me to that land. Come and go with me to that land. Come and go with me to that land where I'm bound. Come and go with me to that land. Come and go with me to that land where I'm bound. Won't you come and go with me to that land? Won't you come and go with me to that land? Come and go with me to that land where I'm bound. Won't you come and go with me to that land? Come and go with me to that land. Come and go with me to that land where I'm bound.
Well, I'm on my way, and I won't turn back. I'm on my way, and I won't turn back. I'm on my way, and I won't turn back. I'm on my way, great God, I'm on my way. Gonna ask my brother, won't you come with me? Gonna ask my sister, won't you come with me? Gonna ask my children, won't you come with me? I'm on my way, great God, I'm on my way. Gonna on my way, and I won't turn back. And I'm on my way, and I won't turn back. I'm on my way, and I won't turn back. I'm on my way, great God, I'm on my way.
Oh, freedom. Oh, freedom over me. And before I'd be a slave, I'd be buried in my grave and go home to my Lord and be free.
They told us we wouldn't get here, King called out that afternoon. And there were those who said that we would get here only over their dead bodies. Already he strayed from lyrical, prepared remarks about their long march from Selma, through desolate valleys and across the trying hills, to claim validation for the competent and concrete result. But all the world today knows that we are here, he declared extemporaneously. And we are standing before the forces of power in the state of Alabama, saying, we ain't gonna let nobody turn us around.
Race is such a two-faced Janus. On the one hand, it makes people nervous. On the other hand, it is the gateway to great discovery, because it is the key to how we live out our principles or don't live out our principles all through American history. And so, to me, the key thing is kind of building up your incentive and your comfort to be uncomfortable, to push across boundaries. And that once you do that, you get hooked on the sense of discovery, because you'll constantly be finding things that you didn't know.
Taylor Branch is an amazing writer and scholar who spent more than 2 decades putting together the masterpiece of the King years, a trilogy of the civil rights movement.
The power of the books is how honest they are. Obviously, this is somebody who was in deep sympathy with the movement. He participated in the movement. He wanted to understand it in all of its facets, and I really admire the honesty of what he's accomplished as a historian.
Because his research is so stunning and his writing is so accessible, that this is the way that I'm convinced that future generations are going to learn about the civil rights period of our history.
There were cries about whether the raiding party would lay siege or actually invade the sanctuary, and Harrison, preaching in skitters to fathom what might happen, said he had been braced for phone threats, night riders, almost any persecution short of assault on a Sunday service. But now he understood the saying that bad surprises in Lowndes could outstrip your fears.
When you spend 24 years chronicling something like the civil rights movement, I asked him, I said, you know, what sent you on that journey? And he said, well, I got involved in some of that stuff as a kid, and I wanted to figure out what it was that made it matter to me. He needed to pick it up and examine it in all of its facets to figure out why it mattered to him to go south and to participate in the movement. It makes perfect sense when you know him that it would be grounded in a personal curiosity.
Openness made the sun unexpectedly cruel, so that 250 of the marchers needed medical treatment by nightfall for sunburn and heat stroke. King removed his green marching hat with ear flaps and placed it on John Lewis, saying he needed to protect his shaved head wound from Bloody Sunday. Negro teenagers wrote "Vote" on their foreheads with thick white sun cream. Sister Mary Leoline of Kansas City, the only nun to walk the whole way, wilted inside a layered habit with a starched wimple that framed her round face. Jim Leatherer, a settlement house worker from Saginaw, Michigan, hopped on one leg with crutches, hands and armpits raw, lips cracked from the sun.
You know, it's so interesting to me that when Taylor Branch talks about the civil rights movement and the individuals of the civil rights movement, he has such an intimacy because he was reading their taped conversations from the FBI. He interviewed people. He understands the importance of Americans understanding what the civil rights movement was, that it wasn't just Rosa Parks sat down on the bus and refused to get up, and Martin Luther King led a march, and then everything was kumbaya. He knows that we need to understand the process, the history, the context, the nitty-gritty of what was going on. There was a lot of brutality. We are a nation that has tried to heal from that, but he wants us to look at the complexity of what was going on during the Civil Rights Movement.
I want people in my writing to have a sense of wonder at its best that this was going on behind the scenes of something that I thought that I knew about, so that there's a sense of discovery there.
The National Archives was created so that the American people can hold their government accountable for their actions. This is a good example of how, because we have captured this information, he was able to tell the story.
I use the National Archives for my research almost constantly. Certainly the presidential libraries, starting with the Kennedy Library and even the Eisenhower Library, and more time than anywhere else in the Johnson Library.
We wanted to recognize a scholar who has used the records of this institution so that we could let other people know all of the things that are here. And there's no one better than someone like a Taylor Branch, who's won a Pulitzer, whose work is widely read, whose work will be read 100 years from now. You know, in addition to this amazing Pulitzer Prize-winning trilogy that Taylor Branch wrote, he's also written about the NCAA and some of the corruption and some of the scandals with the NCAA. He really was President Bill Clinton's memoirs.
It was an amazing experience too. One of the things I was trying to communicate is just what it's like for a historian. I mean, by day I'm sitting there wrestling with Martin Luther King and, you know, the Vietnam War and everything, and then I'd get a call, can you be at the White House at 10 o'clock? And it was like parachuting into another universe. My role is to get as much information that's new and valuable and authentic on this tape as possible for the future.
They're a fascinating piece of history, and there will come a time when those things will be available, will be released many years from now. And it's going to be a unique kind of oral history of that presidency, that period of time.
What has struck me in the times when I've met Taylor Branch is that he is still that guy going through those tapes, opening up those books, looking through those dusty volumes, finding the stories, wanting to be able to help Americans understand themselves and understand their history.
The last year, Ferguson, Baltimore, Staten Island, these things have shown us how much work there is to do. Everywhere you go, the place where we are residually at war with ourselves, still. You scratch the surface and underneath it is either a racial fear or a hostility that only requires a spark. Who we are, how we got to this point, and how we get to the next horizon, you know, Taylor's attending to that. He's doing very, very important work.
Ladies and gentlemen, the 2015 Records of Achievement Award honoree, Taylor Branch.
The Records of Achievement Award is the Foundation's highest honor, and each year the award itself includes facsimiles of records from the National Archives collection that is of special significance to our honoree. This year, in recognition of your groundbreaking research on the Civil Rights Movement, we featured two facsimiles of a document that you sought under the 1986 Freedom of Information Act, a lawsuit against the FBI, Branch versus Federal Bureau of Investigation, Civil Action number 86-1643. The FOIA request was for classified records that the FBI had compiled between 1962 and 1963 on Stanley Levison, a friend and advisor to Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr. The facsimile on the left shows the heavily redacted page that was originally provided to you by the FBI. It is a 1962 memo from the FBI director to the Attorney General concerning Dr. King. The facsimile on the right shows the memo after it was recently declassified on September 18th, 2015, in your honor. Tonight is its debut. The facsimiles are accompanied by the Records of Achievement medallion, which is composed of bronze from our original document encasements, which were removed from the rotunda of the National Archives during the 2003 renovation. We present this award and these records as our tribute to your commitment to consulting primary sources as you continue to tell the stories of our nation's history. Ladies and gentlemen, please join us in congratulating the recipient of the National Archives Foundation 2015 Records of Achievement Award, Taylor Branch.
So we're welcoming Eric. So come on up. So while Eric is, former Attorney General Eric Holder is taking his seat, I just want to recognize Representative John Conyers from Michigan, who joined us in progress.
Well, good evening, and it is a pleasure to be here. I want to correct at least a couple of things that Alelia said. I think you said a couple of thousand pages. It's actually 2,912 pages. Isn't that correct? Yes. And I also want to indicate that I will be calling Mr. Branch Taylor because he said I should call him that. I'm inclined, given the fact that you are one of my icons, a personal hero of mine, to be more formal, but at your insistence, I will call you Taylor. We saw a very moving film. Let's start with some of the basics. Did the civil rights movement succeed? Do you think it actually accomplished its goals?
It accomplished many goals, and I think a lot of them are still living in the future because when we are in touch with what we want to become, we will do that in reference to that movement because it's indelible that's when people discovered that they could do things they didn't think they could do in the name of freedom.
What do you think about collateral impacts that the movement had, its impact on other people struggling for their own sense of equality? Significant?
I think highly significant, highly overlooked, that once a movement set in motion, people struggling with what equal citizenship really means, it opened new doors for women, for senior citizens, for the disabled, for immigrants, for all kinds of, and as Dr. King said, even for the white South, which was never the Sun Belt when it was segregated. It was the hookworm belt. And my favorite quote on that is from Ivan Allen, the mayor of Atlanta, who said the day the Civil Rights Bill passed, he got the city council to start building a sports stadium on land the city didn't own with money it didn't have for a team it hadn't located. But the very next year got the Milwaukee Braves to move and become the first professional sports team in the South because the end of segregation opened up the South for international commerce. So it paid dividends and is still paying dividends that we really don't attribute to the leadership of a black-led movement.
Now you say it's still paying dividends. What would you, if you had to quantify that or particularize that statement, what would you say? How would you say the movement is still paying dividends to our country?
Well, two examples. To me, the third great pillar of the civil rights era legislatively is the Immigration Reform Act of *65, which for the first time opened naturalized citizenship on an equal basis to the whole world and has dramatically transformed us as the world's first multinational, multi-ethnic democracy that when you go to these ceremonies, all they have to do is, it's on principle. We are founded on an idea. So I think the impact with immigration making us internationally is enormous. And I'd also say gay rights. I mean, gay rights moved at light speed in history because it's an extension of the other movements that followed the civil rights movement.
Dr. King is clearly a seminal figure throughout your work and throughout the movement, obviously. Had he not died in the way in which he did and at the early age that he did, how do you think history would have seen him differently, given the fact that the movement was perhaps, let's say, faltering towards the end and other voices were being heard? Would he be as revered had he not died
I think
when he
that's
did?
a very tough question because you could ask the same thing for President Kennedy.
Sure.
To some degree, dying young is a great thing is a great career move for your historical reputation. And it would have been hard for Dr. King because the movement was eclipsing here and in many ways has been more active outside the United States than inside the United States as far as doing dramatic things, Gdansk, the Soviet Union falling apart. We shall overcome, the Berlin Wall coming down. South Africa, in many respects, you felt that more outside the United States than here. And I don't know, he would, I guarantee you, he would have been called to all of those events and been a spokesperson for it. But it may have been difficult to keep that light shining as brightly.
You quote him saying, he says, after Selma, you said, I don't think he expected to live a long time. What was your basis for that conclusion?
Well, first of all, in his whole career, he had a preoccupation with threats. I mean, he'd been getting threatened since the Montgomery bus boycott, so virtually constantly. So when you live under threat like that, and also when you sense that some of the threats are coming from your own government, not just the state and local government, but even the federal government, paranoia is normal. But I think after Selma and when he started to go north, the evidence to me is that he started telling his staff for the first time, whether or not we succeed the way we did in Selma, we have to leave a witness. We have to go north to Chicago to show the country that race is not and never has been purely about the South, that it's everywhere. We have to protest the Vietnam War to make sure that people understand the connections between violence of the flesh and violence of the spirit, and racism and war are connected. And to do the Poor People's Campaign, he was always saying, in fact, there's this wonderful quote shortly before he was killed. He's exhorting his staff to finish the Poor People's Campaign and quoting a verse in Revelation that says, we have to finish with what we have, even if it's next to nothing. So I think he did have a strong sense that the movement was no longer cresting, but that he was still leaving a witness for the future.
You write about an incident, I believe, in Birmingham. He's on stage, he's assaulted by somebody who comes out of the audience. Could you tell us a little about that and also the impact that had on people who were part of the movement and who witnessed that?
Well, I interviewed a bunch of people who were impressed by that because they'd always thought that nonviolence was kind of a Baptist preacher getting carried away with turn the other cheek, and they'd never really seen Dr. King's commitment to nonviolence. But when that white Nazi, it was a member of the Nazi Party who came up and slugged him in Birmingham right in the middle of and more than once. And Dr. King dropped his hands and kept saying, "Let him alone, I want to talk to him." And they're holding him, trying to hit him some more. And a number of people, including Rosa Parks and Septima Clark, two revered figures, Septima particularly to me, said that was the first time they'd really seen nonviolence at its core. And Rosa Parks actually cared about it so much that she helped take care of Dr. King after he got slugged, and she gave him her favorite remedy, which was warm Coca-Cola and 2 aspirin for the after effects of that. So it had a big effect on her and lots of other people.
So Rosa Parks was a pharmacist in addition to everything else. Interesting. You've also said that the politics today is about the 1960s. What do you mean by that?
Well, I think that a lot of our politics is subliminally a reaction to the 1960s. And when I was doing the tapes with President Clinton, he surprised me at one point. And by the way, it's not my fault those tapes are not released. That's not up to me. But at one point, he said that his pollsters could predict how somebody was going to vote with 85, or maybe it was 90% accuracy by asking one question. On balance, do you think the 1960s were good or bad for America? And it's just at a time when the government was acting as a positive force in race relations and in other things, and in many respects, politics are organized around whether that's a good idea or not, or whether we should resent the government for being involved in that sort of thing. So in that sense, I think we are still fighting over the aftermath of that, and that's not unusual in American history. We fought over the aftermath of the Civil War. In some senses, we're still doing it, but we certainly did it intensely for 50 years.
You talk about, in the distillation, the King years, 18 moments in the movement, 18 pivotal moments in the movement. How did you pick those 18? And maybe you could share just a couple, 3 of those with us tonight, and tell us why those were such important moments.
That's a great question, and it was really hard. I mean, teachers basically said, your books are great and the detail is great, but we can't assign 900-page books. So please give us something that can draw people in. We like the language and the detail, but give us some excerpts. So they wanted a book under 200 pages long to substitute for all 3,000 pages. So that was, like liposuction on yourself. I mean, it was not easy, but what I wanted to do was to pick sections that would give you some semblance of what it was like for a movement to grow. We seldom analyze the word movement, but it begins when you're moved in a very small moment, a moment of conscience or a moment of connection with another person that makes you moved. And then in certain circumstances, you can make it build until you can literally feel it moving history. And the movement did that, so I tried to pick moments beginning with Dr. King's very first speech, when he didn't even know he was going to give a speech. He had 30 minutes warning, and he gave a speech on the first night of the bus boycott on December 5th. And he struggled in that speech, and thankful to somebody who recorded it on a big reel-to-reel recorder and left it behind. You can hear him feeling for the audience in there. And to me, it was really important because that's a moment when you can almost feel an embryo of a movement in the reaction between a gifted public orator and his audience. And finally, when he said, there comes a time when people get tired of being trampled over by the iron feet of oppression, he feels the reaction and he starts going, and then the reaction just washes over him. And as a trained orator, he called it a rabbit in the bushes. The rabbit jumped out of the bushes when the crowd reacted, so you fire at the rabbit again. Which is what he did, and you can hear that develop in that speech. So that was the beginning of it, and of course, by the end, actually there are 3 chapters in there about Bob Moses, who I noticed was, because in some ways he's like the anti-king. He's quiet, he's captivating, he believes in the grassroots, he doesn't believe in big follow-me leadership. His name is Moses, and King is more like Moses, follow me. So there are 3 chapters on him and Freedom Summer and his anguish over whether or not to invite white college students to come down for Freedom Summer. He's the father of Freedom Summer, and the ethical dilemmas of deliberately using white victims, calling them in, knowing that some of them are going to get killed and that the country will care more about racial injustice if it happens to them. And is it moral to use them in a movement when you're trying to cease being victims, but are you victimizing them? These are very profound things. So I was trying to highlight people who are struggling with profound questions that still have pertinence today.
Now, you talk about Bob Moses. His is a name that is not as widely known, obviously, as Dr. King, Ralph Abernathy, Congressman Lewis. Who are some of the other people who we don't know as well and who should be known from the movement?
Well, I think Bernard Lafayette is here, and he's definitely one. He's on the committee. He's also a SNCC leader. Diane Nash, I would really hold up as one of the foremost female leaders in the freedom rides, the Nashville movement. Selma was her idea. I mean, I'll say it right out, but nobody knows that. I mean, she literally badgered Dr. King to go into Selma as an answer to the Birmingham church bombing, and she presented him with a plan and aggravated him until he did it. Her husband said that if you've seen the movie The African Queen and you saw Humphrey Bogart with the leeches on him, that was the way Diane would get on you to do something. And she's an amazing lady.
As you think about her and the great work that she did, what about the role of women in the movement? Were they given opportunities? Did they play significant roles? Have they been recognized to the extent that they should have been?
Well, it is easy to forget what a different time it was for women then. You're a lawyer and know it better than I, but I was stunned to read Hoyt v. Florida, in which the Supreme Court upheld a Florida statute in 1960 that said women could serve on juries in the state of Florida, where they were prohibited from many others, but only if they affirmatively went down to the courthouse and signed a petition asking to be considered for jury duty and attesting that it would not interfere with their homemaking duties. This is a different world. Nevertheless, women ran the movement as long as there wasn't a microphone. I mean, when there came to be a microphone, the men would give the speeches, but they ran the churches, and they ran, movements depend on meetings and preparations and training to march out and so on and so forth, and most of that was done by the women. And indeed, if you look at the photographs of, in my view, the emotional breakthrough for the whole movement era, when America finally quit saying that's somebody else, that's terrible, but it's somebody else's job, and their barriers were broken down, and they said, it's my job, was the Dogs and the Fire Hoses in Birmingham on May 2nd and May 3rd, 1963, on little kids. These are small children. I have photographs of children as young as 6 marching in to those Dogs and Fire Hoses and singing Sunday school songs, and most of them were girls. So women were very, very significant in the movement. Diane said the Civil Rights Movement was the first army that welcomed, because it's a nonviolent army, it welcomed women as generals.
One of the key aims of the movement was to obtain the right to vote. Selma, 1965 Voting Rights Act. Here we are in 2015, and we're dealing with voter identification laws that some have described, me, I guess, well, let's be truthful about this, as inconsistent with the act, inconsistent with the movement. What are your feelings about that? How do you think Dr. King would react to these voter ID laws and the notion of trying to prevent voter fraud?
I think he would react against the kind of casual cynicism about voting and that people don't care and what people gave for voting. I hope that his spirit would be about moving the Voting Rights Act forward. We need to address apportionment and encourage voting, make it a positive right. We're still in we're banning discrimination phase. There's a lot about, in other words, we're going backwards when we should be going forwards about affirming votes and affirming the importance of it. To me, my remedy is that I wish before every political event that everybody who speaks should recite the preamble to the Constitution. It's only one sentence, but it's the most unbelievably optimistic sentence you can ever imagine a political body having. And it's about what we are endeavoring to do together. And that's the spirit in which we ought to be approaching voting, to get more people involved. And unfortunately, we're fighting a rear guard action.
Do you think that we as a nation talk enough about things racial?
No. No, I don't. I still think we're in a stage where most people tend to assume, well, here's politics, and there'll be the debate tonight, and they probably won't ever discuss race, and I know the analysts won't say they didn't discuss race, they won't bring it up. But if race comes up, then you stop your normal politics and you go and you have a, quote, conversation about race, and then you go back to politics. That's because people are not comfortable with the notion that race has a very central place to play in all of our politics about what we really mean by equal citizenship. So, I think the very fact that we're uncomfortable and we want to end it or that sort of thing shows how badly we need to deal with it.
I've seen you say things about George Wallace and compared him in some ways to contemporary figures or contemporary politicians. What is the connection that you draw between him or things that he did and more contemporary people in public office?
I think Dr. King said it best. He said, and this is in 1963, Dr. King made a speech in which he said, Wallaceism is bigger than Wallace, meaning that Wallace was adapting to this. This is the same year that Wallace began saying segregation forever, was sworn in. By the end of the year and the March on Washington, Wallace is planning to run for president, and Dr. King said he has radically changed his stump speech into minor little classics. He expunged all references to race, which had already been talked about, and he had a new thing saying, I have never denigrated anybody on the basis of their race. I'm only about the restoration of local government against the tyrannical central government of pointy-headed bureaucrats, judges, and central control in Washington, D.C. And he invented a lot of the language of resentment of the federal government when it became no longer respectable to express the language of resentment of black people, which is what politics in the South had been about for 100 years. So in that sense, he's inventing a lot of the vocabulary of modern politics that has contributed to our gridlock in resenting. That's why I want people to recite the preamble to the Constitution, because I think that's out of phase with the underlying sentiment of politics being so much about resenting government.
Another politician from that time, Lyndon Johnson. Do you think he has been given the credit that he deserves for the successes of the movement?
No. No, I don't. I think it's very sad that Democratic conventions don't review his record, good and bad, and claim him as somebody who advanced so many. To me, it's scandalous that the Immigration Reform Act of 1965 is not upheld as a great shining moment in America's example of democracy for the world. I mean, he went up to the Statue of Liberty and said, never again will the shadow to freedom, the gate to this free nation be shadowed by the twin barriers of prejudice and privilege, where no foreigner is too foreign to becoming a fellow citizen. It's a remarkable example, and it's totally buried.
Well, let me ask you a question that in some ways I suppose is unfair, but I've got the mic. Do you think that we'll get to the promised land?
I feel glimpses of the promised land all the time, so I don't know that the promised land is not bliss. But I do. What's good about the promised land is that we have signals that we know what it feels like when we're to be headed that way, and maybe that is the promised land. That's what you have to have. You have to have this sense that you're working in the right direction.
You probably know him as well as anybody. How do you explain the magnetism, the power, the enduring fascination that we have with Dr. King? What was it about him? What qualities did he have that made him such a compelling figure?
Well, I think a lot of it is the timbre of his voice. When you hear a King speech, before you understand any of the words, you hear a struggle in there. I call it a furnace. that's burning. And what it is realism about how cruel and steel hard. He said life is as hard as crucible steel race can be. He said that over the bodies of the children bombed in Birmingham. But you also see somehow this sense of hope. And they're at war with each other. And I think the fact that you could feel that when he spoke, and the fact that his oratory was so unbelievably and skillfully balanced with one foot in the Constitution and one foot in the Scriptures. Equal souls and equal votes. If you believe either in our civic view or you believe in our ecumenical notion of salvation, whatever that may be, you have to join this cause because it's about the relationship. So a lot of it is about the emotional way he projected a message that really resonated with the best of, as he put it, he's always the best in the Judeo-Christian tradition and the best in the American dream.
In a world that has 140 character requirements, would he be as successful today as he was then, trying to make a moment into a movement?
That's really hard. He is a classical orator. And President Obama can be a classical orator at times, but there's not a landscape of them now. I don't think Twitter was made for him.
Probably hard to do. I have a dream in 140. Do you think that Dr. King would have been very surprised by having an African-American president as soon as we did by 2008, having an elected African-American president at that time? Think he could have envisioned that while he was still alive?
I don't think, no. Well, I'm always very reluctant to channel him because I'm asked to do that about what he would do. But I can say at the time, I don't think he expected a black president, not just within his lifetime, but within the next 50 years. So, no, by that standard, I think that he would be astonished by how rapidly we progressed on other issues, like for women and the disabled and gay. I mean, that was a totally different world. I mean, one civil rights leader married with a family, was closeted gay. He was murdered. His family hired a private investigator. The private investigator said, "We will find out what happened to your husband, but it may lead in this direction." And the wife and the whole family said, "If it's going to lead in that direction, we don't want to know who murdered him." They were more frightened of any revelation that he might have a closeted gay life than they cared about who murdered him. That's how fraught that era was, and to remove that kind of that's one thing about the race. When people say that things haven't changed, that kind of fear that you could feel in a room when I was growing up in Atlanta, a mixed audience like this, people would have clammy palms because we would be worried that something would happen, that the Klan would come or the police would come, or more commonly that some parent would come who's upset and claiming not for himself, but because you were going to ruin his business or that other people would care. So that kind of fear is gone.
Maybe we can end this way, or maybe the last couple of questions. You and I were talking earlier today, and you talked about history in 50-year cycles. Maybe you could share that observation with the audience. I thought that was kind of interesting, the way you said that you can look at how the United States has operated in 50-year cycles or so, and where are we in that cyclical notion?
Well, I think that there are interesting parallels if you just look at the issue of race and freedom between the period between 1865 and 1915 and the period between 1965 and 2015. 1865 is the end of the Civil War. The three civil rights amendments, armies of abolitionist women starting the first schools for the freedmen. 50 years later, all of the whole country is slathered with Confederate memorials. Lynching is going on, but there's no there's no lynching memorial anywhere in the United States. And President Woodrow Wilson goes to Gettysburg and said, there's no point in talking about what this battle signified or who won or what happened. The only thing that's important is that we get back together over a quarrel forgotten. And he began segregating the Washington Civil Service the next day. And Woodrow Wilson is seen as a progressive figure, and yet he was acutely sensitive, as the first Democrat from the South after the Civil War, to the notion that the country was basically the locus of American politics was white people north and south saying we don't want to fight over the race issue anymore, and segregation is a good way out. We want to set this thing aside. And in fact, he told delegations of black leaders when they came in to protest that, he said to them literally, this is the quote, he said, segregation is a benefit to you, gentlemen, and not a humiliation, and it ought to be regarded by you in that way. Because he meant it was protecting them against things that were more hateful. And that's what, so we misinterpreted and in many ways turned the meaning of the civil rights movement, the Civil War, upside down in history. When I was growing up, I was taught in the South that the Civil War didn't have anything to do with slavery, that sort of thing. That's in the history books. To this day, history books say that the movement that restored white supremacy and ended Reconstruction has a name. It is called redemption. That's the name of it. The Redeemers ended Reconstruction through terrorism. And yet it has a positively religious notion. So we are capable of believing what we want to believe about what history meant, where race is centrally at stake. And you could argue that since 1965, in the last 50 years, a lot of our politics is in reaction. You know, President Johnson, the great part of that speech in Selma is not the "we shall overcome." If you ever read the speech on March 15th, it's the first few paragraphs. He said, you know, there are times when fate and destiny meet at a single place in a single moment. So it was at Lexington and Concord, so it was at Selma, and so it was at Appomattox, and so it was last week in Selma. He's putting a black-led, all-black, nonviolent movement at the forefront of American patriotism. That notion is not accepted, and a lot of our politics is in rebellion against the notion that in effect, a black-led movement was acting like modern founding fathers there in advancing the cause of freedom that, you know, that we had accepted when we started the American experiment.
I think I know the answer to this question, but it'll be my last one. You're a person steeped in history, a person who has done Pulitzer Prize-winning work when it comes to analyzing the movement that transformed this nation, a person also who is very cognizant of our contemporary situation. How would you describe yourself? Are you an optimist or a pessimist about where we are and where this country is about to go, based on the studies that you have conducted and the writings that you have you've shared with us?
My model is Dr. King, and I think I resonate by the same way. I try to be a realist about how bad things are, but I don't believe there's any point in doing it if you don't believe we can summon up, you know, the promised land in that speech. So in that sense, I'm an optimist, and I was an optimist that it would only take 3 years to do the 24, and I do, in a practical sense, I want to thank my agent who is here, because it's not easy to keep the publisher going for an extra 21 years. So I do want to thank Liz and my family for putting up with me all the time.
Well, Taylor, Mr. Branch, thanks so much for sharing your thoughts with us this evening. More importantly, thanks for all the great work that you have done that has enlightened this nation, and that I think in some ways is a blueprint for the progress that I think inevitably will come to this country. And it was great to see that you are a singer in addition to everything else that you do. When will you be going solo?
Actually, I have a rock and roll CD that's going to be released on Monday. But that's a surprise too. I thought I was in charge of this group here, and I had no idea about that. So I'm really pleased.
Do you really have a rock and roll CD coming out on Monday?
On Monday.
Well, all right. Let's promote it. What's the name of the album, CD? Or?
It's our reunion band. To help earn our way through college back in the 60s, we had a band, and we had a reunion a few years ago. We had so much fun, we've made 3 CDs. This is the third one. Our group is called Off Our Rocker. And it'll be out on digital release. I have 2 solos in there. Anyway, it's a lot of fun.
So this is like Straight Out of Atlanta or something like that? Or?
It's really bad.
All right.
Yeah, really bad.
Taylor Branch, ladies and gentlemen.
This is just the kind of evening that we were hoping to have. So, you know, how marvelous to have the former Attorney General of the United States with Pulitzer Prize-winning author Taylor Branch talking about these things. And I would like to hear Taylor interview Eric. That's so that next year, next year. But thank you very much for that conversation. I also want to thank our very hardworking staff and who made everything flow very smoothly. You just don't know what's going on upstairs right now, where they're trying to reconfigure some things. I'd like to now invite you to continue the evening upstairs when we enjoy dinner with our honoree in the Rotunda Galleries. Very few people get to have dinner only a few feet away from the Declaration of Independence, the Bill of Rights, and the Constitution. And that's what we're able to offer because David Ferriero, the Archivist of the United States, invites us into his home. So thank you all very much. Enjoy dinner, and then there will be dessert and another musical surprise.